Hey guys, and welcome back to another command block tutorial. Today's video, I'm going to be teaching you how to become a Jedi in Minecraft. Yes, this is actually, don't worry, not all these commands are for today. This is actually part of a series of essentially Star Wars themed kits that work in both PvP and PvE. And they're really cool. And yeah, there's a bunch of different things. So last episode we did the Trooper, which has a blaster, a grenade, and a jetpack. Now, today we're doing the Jedi. And as you guys kind of saw, there's three main abilities that we have. Of course, we're using a diamond sword as a lightsaber. And the really cool thing about the diamond sword is that whenever I'm sneaking and I'm getting shot with a blaster, I will actually deflect the blasters back in the direction that they came. You can even see there's actually a little bit of an animation that happens if they actually shoot me. Now, the other two abilities that we have are the Force Push and the Force Pull. So the Nether Quartz is the push, and the Light Gray Dye is actually the pull. Now, these two abilities are actually on a cooldown, so they're reusable, but you can balance them individually by tweaking their cooldowns however you like. So the first, you guys can probably imagine what a Force Push looks like. We just push anything in front of us back. This is going to work on players and mobs, by the way. So I can push these guys back, but I can also pull them towards me, which is of course perfect because I have a lightsaber, so I can then just whack them with my saber. But of course, maybe you're getting overwhelmed, so you can always just push back a huge horde of enemies really easily. And then, if you want to actually bring some of them in, just pull them back and then you can kill them with your lightsaber. So it's pretty cool, pretty effective set of abilities. You have Force Push, Force Pull. You also can jump really high because you are a Jedi, of course. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And of course, because this is a PvP design thing, this is designed to function in PvP, players do have blasters that you can actually deflect. Skeletons have the same functional blasters as the players, basically. So if this was a player, even though I'm in single player, you can actually deflect blasters. So this is really cool because this works in PvE and PvP. Now, if you want to know about how the blasters work, this is a multi-part series, so you do need to actually make the blasters for the skeletons. I did that last episode. There'll be a link to that in the description. Today we're just going to be focusing on the Jedi. So there are a couple of things that we need to do before we actually get started into the main commands. The first thing that we need to do is actually create a few different scoreboards. Now, if you guys created the Trooper that I did in the first part of the series, these first two scoreboards you don't actually have to create. But if you haven't, you do need to type this into chat. You can do it with a slash mark if you're typing in chat, or you can just type it in with a command block like I did. Either works. So the first thing you need to add is p-timer followed by dummy. The next thing you need to add is ability 1. And I actually lied, there should be 3 because we also need to have ability 2. So if you guys did the Trooper commands from the first part of the series, you'll have already done all 3 of these and you don't need to do them again. However, if you have not, you will need to introduce those. And we have 3 new scoreboards that we're introducing right here. So the first of these scoreboards is actually the anim, which is short for animation, because we're doing some stuff with animations and their scoreboards, so you will need to make that. Next up, you will need to add the scoreboard push, and that's for the Force Push. And lastly, pull for the Force Pull. And yeah, that's what you need to do to set up. As you guys can probably imagine, Force Pull and Force Push are actually incredibly similar. So let's first look at the lightsaber and look at just the general abilities, which includes the jump boost and the strength that you get to make your lightsaber more powerful, but also more specifically how the deflection works and how the animations work. So first things first, this is actually the simplest part. All the deflection stuff that's happening is entirely a singular command. In fact, if you don't care about the animation, you don't actually need to include this command or this entire chain. If you don't care about the animation, you don't need to do that. But you will need to do this, not this one. You will need to do this. What we're doing is we're checking at a player with the tag Jedi, and for all of these you will need to have the tag Jedi that's holding a diamond sword in their main hands. We're also going to be checking if they're sneaking. If so, we're going to check essentially if they got hit by one of the blaster bullets. Once again, we made that last episode. If the player is in range of one of the blaster bullets, it's going to more or less make the blaster bullet turn around 180 degrees and go back right the way it came. Pretty simple, and that's more or less how we're doing the actual deflection. That's all you need to do if all you care about is that. If you also care about the animation, we're going to be doing something very similar, checking for the Jedi holding a diamond sword that is sneaking, and it's going to check, once again, is there a blaster in range? If so, the player is going to have their anim score set to 1. And now I'm going to show you what the animation scores do. So, the first thing that we're going to check, this is actually going to reset the player's animation score. What we're doing is, if the player has a score of 0 and they don't have the tag block anim, essentially, if they don't have this tag, then they are not going to repeat. This just makes it so the animations play once and don't repeat. Apologies if that is confusing, but just keep copying what you see on screen and you'll be fine. Essentially, if the player has an animation score of 0, then it's going to have the animation humanoid base pose, and then all this other stuff following it. This essentially sets the animation back to normal, what you would expect. The next thing that we're going to be doing is, similarly, if the player has an animation score of 0, we're going to give them the tag block anim. This just blocks any other animations from happening. This makes it so the animation doesn't repeat, but only happens once. So, as you guys can see, every time I get hit, I'm actually going to do a little bit of an animation as I send the blaster bullet back to the skeleton. Now, the next animation actually isn't for the lightsaber, but rather is for the force push and the force pull. As you guys can see, when I use these abilities, I do actually do a little bit of an animation to kind of represent me using the force. That's what the next thing is. So, what we're doing here is we're just checking, does the player have an anim score of 2? If so, we're going to play this animation with all this other stuff following it. And similarly, but actually in the reverse, if the player has the anim score of 2, we're actually going to remove the block anim. Essentially, that is just making it so that the animation for using the force ability is not played on repeat. And lastly, what we're going to be doing is if the player has an anim score of 1, that is, they deflected a blaster with their lightsaber, we're going to play this animation. And exactly the same as the last thing, if the player has an anim score of 1, it's going to remove that tag. Once again, this just makes it not repeatedly play the animation, it will only play it once. That's all that's happening. Apologies if that is confusing, but I promise if you guys follow that how you see it, you won't have any problems. Next up, on a 10 tick delay, we're just setting the player's anim score back to 0. This just makes it so that after the player gets hit or shortly after they use their force ability, it's just going to reset their animation score and set them back to what they would be. That is the base animation. So that's it for the animations for the most part. The last two things we have are just some basic effects. So we're giving the Jedi jump boost, give them bonus jump. We're also giving them strength to make the lightsaber a little bit more deadly. Now, you can also include slow falling, which would probably make a more realistic Jedi jump. However, I have found this to be somewhat annoying and in combat actually might end up getting you killed. So I will leave that optional. If you guys would also like to include slow falling, you certainly can. Next up, we're going to move on to the force push. As you guys can see on the right side of my screen, I have the push scoreboard being displayed. Essentially what happens, anytime I use the force push, we're actually just going to add a scoreboard to anything right in front of me, and that's going to be the push score. If you guys watch the number, not the husk real quick, you see that it's going to count up really quickly. What's actually happening with this is they're not real knockback. Essentially, we just give the husk a score that for a short period of time is going to be looking towards me and then teleporting backwards, which essentially gives him knockback. Now, the same is actually true for the force pull. We just have pretty much the same thing in reverse, facing towards the player rather than away. So let's take a look at how that works, as well as how the actual cooldown works. The first thing that we're doing is checking is the player a Jedi, are they holding quartz in their hands, and if so, we're going to look out 4 blocks in front of the player, and then any entity within 3 blocks, this does include other players mind you, is going to have their push score set to 1. Next up, we're going to just simply teleport the same player. So once again, the Jedi holding quartz, sneaking, go 4 blocks out, anything within 3 blocks is going to simply teleport still facing the nearest Jedi. That's way we're going to ensure that they are looking at the player as soon as the command starts. Next up, we're going to set the anim score to 2. This is the same command, a Jedi holding quartz, sneaking. We're setting their anim score to 2. That's what's doing the animation stuff that we saw at the beginning of the tutorial. Next up, we're going to be doing something very similar, except instead of the animation score, we're changing their ability 1 to 4. This is the cooldown for their primary ability. So essentially, this is however many seconds you want it to be. If you want it to be more than 4 seconds, just make this number more than 4 seconds. However long you want the cooldown, make that number however many seconds you want. Next up, we're going to be simply doing the same thing, looking at a Jedi, holding quartz, sneaking. We're going to play this sound. This is just representative of the sound that they force push, even though I don't necessarily know that it has a sound, but it feels a lot better when it does in game, so we're going to be doing this. And lastly, we're just going to be clearing the player of quartz whenever they use the ability. This way, they obviously can't spam the ability, it's not going to be working for them, so they have to wait for the cooldown to reset, essentially. Next up, we're going to be actually controlling the cooldown, and I'm going to once again change the scoreboard. You can see, it's going to slowly count down, and when the score gets back to 0, I get my force push back. Now, I was firing a little bit quicker because I had both classes equipped at once, but don't worry about that. That's all we're doing. If the player has an ability 1 score of 1 or higher, and their tag is Jedi, simply remove an ability 1 score of 1. This is on a 20 tick delay. Next up, if the player has an ability 1 score of 0, then give them quartz. Simply, if their cooldown's over, give them the item that they need. And that's how a very basic, pretty simple cooldown system works. The last thing that we have is the actual effects of the force push. So, and mind you, this is actually on a 0 tick delay. For anything that has a score of push 1 or higher, this is just checking, is the player in the middle of a force push? If so, then it's going to add the push score of 1. So as soon as the push, because remember, when we force push something, we set their push score to 1. So as soon as I add it, it's going to quickly add up. Now, in the next command, we're going to check, is the score 10 or higher? If so, it's going to set the push score to 0. This means that after 10 attempts of repeating this command, it's just going to end the force push. Then we have the actual teleport commands. If the player, or if the entity, has a score of push that is 1 or higher, they're in the middle of being force pushed, they're going to teleport themselves backwards facing the nearest Jedi. We also have true here to make sure that they don't go into walls. See, if I have my little dummy husk, and he's up against the wall, he's not really going to go anywhere, because we don't want to send anything through any blocks. Lastly, we have exactly the same command, except we have a little bit of a 0.1 here. This just makes sure that the player, if they're like slightly upwards, it's not going to make the force push like completely useless. This just pushes the target a little bit upwards and just makes it a bit more consistent. Come here. That's it for the push, and you guys can probably guess it, but the pull is almost exactly the same. So, setting my scoreboard to pull, you guys can see I have the guy over there, I pull, his score goes up, and then he gets pulled towards me. Realistically, the only difference between the push and the pull is that the pull obviously pulls you towards it so that the teleport command is positive rather than negative, and also that the target range is actually longer and farther away. So what we're doing here, exactly the same command you saw with the pull. We're checking, is the Jedi sneaking, are they holding light gray? And then we're going to go 10 blocks out. So rather than 4 blocks out, we're going 10 blocks out, and then for anything within 7 blocks. But we are doing a C equals 3, meaning you can only pull a maximum of 3 entities at a time. If that's the case, just set their pull score to 1. Next up, we're going to be doing the same thing. If the player is using their ability, sneaking, holding the item as a Jedi, etc., all the target mobs are going to be teleported facing the player, just to make sure that they are facing the right direction at the start of the pull. Once again, same thing. Is the player holding the item, are they sneaking, etc., set their animation score, anim, to 2. It's going to be doing the same animation as the force pull. Similarly, we're going to be setting their ability 2 score to 8. Once again, this is however many seconds of cooldown that you guys want. Feel free to make this longer, shorter, whatever fits for your use case. This is however many seconds you want the cooldown to be, change it to whatever you want. Next up, we're going to be playing the pretty similar sound, except we changed the riptide to 2, so it does sound at least a little bit different. You guys can always adjust the sound as you see fit though, so do that as you need to. And lastly, we're doing the same thing as we did with the pull, or that we did with the push. Now we're doing it with the pull, with using light gray dye instead of quartz, but otherwise it is exactly the same thing. As you guys saw before, we're just doing the same thing that we saw here on a 20 tick delay. We're just removing the ability to score from the Jedi until it hits 0. Then, once it hits 0, we're giving them the light gray dye back. I'm not going to go any more in depth because it is exactly the same thing you guys already saw, so I'm not going to waste your time. Of course, this is exactly the same as well, except instead of push, we're doing pull. I'm not going to go in depth once again. If it hits pull of 10, it sets it back to 0. Of course, we're doing the exact same command, except now it's positive, meaning instead of going away from the player, it's just going towards the player because it's pulling them. And once again, just going towards the player. I'm not going to go in depth on the pull command because it is very, very similar to the push commands. But the end result is really cool. You're a fairly mobile unit on the battlefield. You have a constant jump boost that you can use to get around. And of course, you don't really have any ranged weapons yourself, but you're able to deflect ranged weapons. Not just be safe for them, but actually deflect them back at the user, which is pretty cool. And of course, for mobs, if they're too far away from you, since you are a melee unit, if you want to bring an enemy close so you can hit him with a lightsaber, you just pull him in a lightsaber. Maybe you're getting overwhelmed, simply push him away. Pretty simple. This really gives you a lot of control over the battlefield and does actually kind of have a lot of the feel of Jedi, being able to push and pull enemies towards you, deflect things. It is really fun. Even if you guys aren't using this in like a PvE, PvP type setting, it's just a really fun set of commands you guys can use for honestly anything that you guys want. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys found this useful. If you guys need any help, feel free to leave a comment, but I will pretty much always suggest that rather than leave a comment, you actually join our Discord. There's a lot of people that can help you, and it's also easier because you can send screenshots and all these things. Anyways, thank you guys so much for coming. I hope you guys enjoyed. Bye!